I have not talked that much about Nightmare on Elm Street, but I will say that the sixth film is probably the only one I really don't like, along with the remake. I have ranging views of the first to fifth. I like all five of them to some degree or another. New Nightmare is also enjoyable, but that sixth installment, man, it is. I could get into that in another video, but I kind of wanted to approach this from the same angle of the final Friday the 13th, where you just kind of envision a final installment, no more movies after this, other than a reboot or, something like New Nightmare where it's not even in continuity with what came before. The original script for the sixth film was that Jacob, the son of Alice, would take over his mother's position as the main protagonist and would be aided by the Dream Warriors in taking out Freddy after he had killed his mother. I don't really like this idea all that much because I'm kind of. It's one of those things where it sort of spits in the face of the fourth movie, where the whole idea of that was passing the torch, right? Having the surviving Dream Warriors all have different, powers incorporated into Alice. And to just kind of get rid of her after two movies, it just feels kind of abrupt. I think instead I would prefer if they had her and her son work as a mother and child team to go after Freddy, who in this iteration, right, this alternate script, has plunged an entire town into comatose states where they're just permanently sleeping over the span of a day, a couple of days, and they enter the dream world trying to figure out why he's doing this. What is the purpose of just having all these people asleep and permanently being tortured, right, trapped inside of their own bodies. And Freddy reveals that he's looking for his daughter, and basically it's like a race against the clock where they have to find his daughter and then convince her to help them, or else all these people are going to die from malnutrition and just not being able to do anything besides be in a permanent state of sleep. I think a plot like that would raise the stakes, especially if you have several lead characters, right? One, friends of Jacob, one of which could also fall under the same spell as the town residents, and thus add more drama to the story because it's proven it can also affect members of the main cast, whereas it's before it was just a bunch of random people. You can still incorporate again that aspect from the proper version of Freddy's Dead in terms of him having a child who suddenly figures into this last film. And I didn't really like his demise in the sixth movie, right? The whole pipe bomb thing, just because I don't think it's definitive. I'd rather they have it to where in the dream world there's some area, it could be shaped like a house, but it's some area that Freddy derives his power from, and it's discovered by either Alice or Jacob or even the daughter in this hypothetical film. And once they find it, they have to have someone distract Freddy, right, in some versus battle, probably with Alice, and then her son or Freddy's daughter could go to this core, destroy it with the various powers that they would have in the dream world, and then that would be the end of him. I think that's a hell of a lot more definitive and more realistic not, I guess I shouldn't say realistic, but more something I can believe in terms of being like, oh, this is what finally kills Freddy for good, to just delete and destroy where he's getting his powers from and these regenerative abilities that allow him to appear in people's dreams. And I'm not against implementing the Dream Warriors. I think they're probably the most dynamic cast of characters, but this kind of goes back to what Wes Craven said about how when you do these villain-based franchises, every movie there's a bunch of survivors and you kill off either all of them or most of them, right, except for the final girl, and then you have to start all over with some more characters who might not be as well received. So it's really kind of interesting in the sense that the characters in the third movie are really well liked compared to a lot of the other ones, but by virtue of being in a series like this, they only got to show up one time. And at least that script that talked about, killing off Alice and having her son take over, that would at the very least try to remedy this by bringing him back in, I guess some in the dream sequence. But I think if you're doing that, it still kind of spits in the face of death being permanent. And then you also have to ask yourself, would that version have included Nancy, right? The idea of like her not being represented at all after the third movie, and especially in the final one, the final film in this continuity of six movies. It just seems kind of tacky to me. Like you have to have some mention of her, maybe a short appearance in that other universe. It really just depends on Heather Langenkamp's schedule. But I think if you bring her back in some capacity, not even in the lead role, but just in some form, it also goes back to like tying everything to the first movie and just making it all feel much more conclusive. Because whenever you don't have pieces or remnants of the prior installments besides the third and fourth one, there's always the possibility of like, okay, well, this was just another series of movies and a series of movies and a series, just you want to make sure that every installment has some kind of allusion to it as best you can. Like, I don't expect to be able to reference part two, because part two never gets brought up, even in three, where three is basically the real part two and part two is like an alternate sequel. But you get the idea that it's one of those things where the more you build on stuff that's been introduced before, the more it feels like this is it. This is the real final installment. And of course, in this continuity, you might not have New Nightmare when you do, because you could argue it'd be sort of redundant to have a scary or serious version of Freddy and then do the same thing a couple years later. But I think there's a good chance it still gets made in terms of just being this more, life imitating art sort of experiments that Wes Craven was dealing with. And really, one of my biggest issues with the sequels was just how much goofier Freddy became. So to have the sixth film kind of, again, bring him back to that characterization in the first, where he's just got this evil plan, all these people are going to die if he doesn't free them from this sleep, or they don't get fed by someone else. I really think that sets up a more dramatic and serious tone than whatever the hell Freddy's Dead was.